Hi, everybody. High in the misty highlands, where promises feel closer to the spy, Toan finally remembers the love he lost, the woman who never left, and the future he once dreamed of. His recall doesn't arrive gently. It floods his heart with regret and gratitude, each memory carrying Lytudiep's name. For Diem, this place holds more than memories. It holds a dream, a wedding dream she kept alive through tears, waiting, and unwavering faith. As the wind moves softly through the hills, one question lingers between them. Will this promise in the highlands become the beginning of forever? Because some promises are made not in words, but in the courage to remember and the courage to believe. Some journeys are not measured by distance, but by what they awaken inside us. When Toan and Diem left the city behind and began their climb toward the highlands, neither of them spoke much. The road wound upward in long, patient curves, cutting through hills wrapped in early morning mist. It felt as if the world was slowly asking them to breathe again. Thawne watched the scenery change through the car window. Concrete gave way to green, noise softened into wind, and something deep within him loosened. He could not explain why his chest felt lighter here, only that the air carried a familiarity he had been missing. Every turn of the road felt like a question whispered to his heart. Have you been here before? Diem sat beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had suggested this trip with quiet hesitation, unsure whether it would heal or hurt. The highlands held no dramatic memories she could name, yet they had always represented peace to her, an imagined place where life slowed down enough for truth to surface. Somewhere in her heart lived a simple dream, a wedding without luxury, without witnesses who judged, only vows spoken honestly beneath an open sky. They stopped at a small roadside stall for hot tea. Steam rose into the cold air, blurring their faces for a moment. Toan wrapped his hands around the cup and closed his eyes. The warmth triggered a sudden flicker, him standing in the cold, laughing, promising her something he couldn't quite hear. His head throbbed lightly, but instead of fear, he felt curiosity. "Does this place mean something to me?" he asked softly. Lytudiep hesitated before answering. "Maybe not yet," she said gently, "but it can." As they continued upward, the mist thickened, then slowly lifted, revealing rolling key-hills bathed in pale sunlight. The sight stole Toan's breath. His heart reacted before his memory did. And Lytudiep, watching him in silence, realized that this journey was not about forcing the past to return. It was about giving love the space to speak again, in its own time, on a road that felt both new and strangely familiar. Morning in the highlands arrived gently, wrapped in mist and the soft scent of wet leaves. Toan stepped outside their small guest house just as the sun began to rise, painting the hills in pale gold. The air was crisp, sharp enough to wake something deep within him. He breathed in slowly, and with that breath came a feeling he had known before, peace mixed with longing. The tea hills stretched endlessly before him, rows upon rows shaped by patient hands. As he walked along the narrow path, the sound of his footsteps echoed in his chest. Suddenly, images flickered, him standing on a similar hill, pointing at the horizon, promising a future he believed in with absolute certainty. His heart raced. The memory was incomplete, like a song missing its final verse, but the emotion was unmistakable. Lytudiep watched him from a distance, afraid to interrupt whatever conversation he was having with himself. She followed quietly, her scarf pulled close against the morning chill. She noticed how Toan slowed down near a wooden fence, how his fingers traced the rough surface as if greeting an old friend. "I've touched this before," he said, almost to himself. They shared breakfast at a small wooden table outside the guest house. The food was simple: steamed rice, boiled eggs, hot tea, but it tasted richer than anything they had eaten in the city. Toan smiled without realizing it. "We were happy once," he said suddenly. It wasn't a question. Lytudiep's throat tightened, but she nodded. As the day unfolded, the mountains continued their quiet work. A passing breeze carried laughter from somewhere far away, and Toan remembered laughing too, carefree, certain, deeply in love. Each sound, each scent unlocked another piece. Not full memories, but feelings stitched together by familiarity and trust. Yet with every step forward, Lytudiep felt a shadow of fear. What if the memories returned, but the man chose differently? What if recalling the past meant reopening old wounds? She kept these worries to herself, smiling when he looked her way. As the sun climbed higher, Toan turned to her, eyes steady. "Even if I don't remember everything," he said, "this place reminds me of who I wanted to be." The mountains stood silent, but they had spoken enough. And in their quiet presence, love and memory began, slowly, carefully, to find each other again. Dreams are often quiet. They live in pauses, in glances held a second too long, in words that never quite leave the lips. As afternoon settled over the Highlands, Lytudiep sat alone on the wooden steps of the guest house, watching clouds drift lazily across the sky. The mountains stood tall and patient, as if they had all the time in the world. She wondered if love did, too. She had never asked Toan for a wedding, not before his illness, and certainly not after. Life had taught her to be careful with hope. Yet the dream remained, simple and stubborn, standing beside him, not in a grand hall, but somewhere like this, where promises felt honest and unforced, a place where memory mattered less than intention. Toan found her there, carrying 2 cups of tea. He sat beside her without speaking at first. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was thoughtful. He watched her fingers trace invisible patterns on the step, the same way she did when something weighed on her heart. A sudden clarity struck him. He remembered her like this, always carrying more than she said. "You're thinking about something," he said gently. Lytudiep smiled, shaking her head. "Just the weather," she replied. But the mountains seemed to disagree. A breeze swept through, lifting her hair, and with it came courage she didn't know she had. "I once imagined a wedding," she admitted softly. "Not a big one, just real." Toan felt a sharp ache in his chest. Images rushed in, him holding her hands, promising to protect her, whispering vows he had once believed in completely. His memory was still uneven, but his heart recognized the truth immediately. He realized then that forgetting had never erased what mattered. It had only delayed his understanding. That evening, as they walked through the fading light, the Highlands glowed in quiet colors. Toan stopped suddenly. He turned to her, searching her face. "I don't remember every promise I made," he said honestly, "but I remember wanting a life with you." Lytudiep's eyes filled with tears. She said nothing, afraid that words might break the moment. In that silence, tension and tenderness intertwined. The dream she had hidden for so long stood between them, fragile, hopeful, waiting. And somewhere in the mountains, time slowed, giving Toan the space to choose, not the man he used to be, but the one he was becoming. Promises do not always return the way memories do. Some are not remembered, they are reborn. On their last morning in the Highlands, the sky opened wide and clear, as if the world itself had decided to be honest. Lytudiep stood at the edge of the tea hills, the wind brushing against her coat, unaware that this quiet moment would become the beginning of everything she had once dreamed of. Toan approached slowly. There was a steadiness in his steps that hadn't been there before. The mountains had done their work, not by forcing his past back into place, but by showing him who he was when he was at peace. He stopped beside her, looking out at the endless green waves. And then, without ceremony, without witnesses, he spoke. "I remember now," he said. Not every detail, not every date, but the feeling. He remembered standing somewhere high like this, promising a future built on patience and loyalty. He remembered her tears, her strength, her quiet courage when he had been lost. Most of all, he remembered love. Lytudiep turned to him, her heart racing. He took her hands, warm and certain. "I don't want to promise you the past," he continued. "I want to promise you today, and every ordinary day that follows." Tears blurred her vision. This was not the wedding she had imagined, but it was more real than anything she had dared to hope for. No rings, no applause, just two people choosing each other under an open sky. They stood there for a long moment, letting the silence seal the vow. Somewhere nearby, a farmer laughed. A kettle whistled from the guest house. Life continued, unbothered and beautifully ordinary. As they walked back down the hill together, Lytudiep realized something profound. Dreams do not always come true the way we expect. Sometimes they arrive reshaped, stronger, quieter, and rooted in reality. And in the Highlands, where memory had finally found its way home, love did not ask to be remembered anymore. It simply stayed.